So what we're gonna do today is, well, after a month, I have managed to put together part 15 of our Vampire Survivors series. So this article basically covers the weapon system revamp that I've been working on for the past 6 coding streams, I guess. So what I've done here is I've restored my project all the way back to before the weapon system was revamped. So we're gonna start from here. This is gonna be a very long part, but this is also gonna be a very rewarding part for those of you who have been following our series. The reason for that is because a lot of programming, a lot of it is just organization. Once you get to a certain level, the next step that you want to take is understand how to organize your codes. So let's get started. So the main idea behind this part 15 over here, is that it was quite cumbersome for us to create weapons in our Vampire Survivors project. Say we want to create a new knife weapon. If you wanted to create a new knife weapon, I would have to create one scriptable object for every level of the knife. And then I would have to link these scriptable objects to the prefabs. So like for example, our knife has 8 levels, right? So if we were to create all the 8 levels for our knife, we would have 8 prefabs, and then we would also have 8 scriptable objects. So we have 16 objects just for one weapon. So we would have to also create a knife controller which controls the cooldown and everything, just mainly the cooldown and attacking of the knife. We would also have to create a new behavior script which controls the projectile. So that is 8 prefabs, 8 scriptable objects, 2 scripts. So we have 18 files just for one weapon. So I wanted to update the weapon system so that our weapon system data files will not be spread across multiple data and prefab files. So instead of that, we want all of our data to be in one single file. So we have the knife data, and then we have the evolution data in one array. We would have had base stats, and then we would have data to grow the weapon. So for example, level 2, how does it grow? Level 3, how does it grow? Etc, etc. And then we also have random growth. I'll explain this later, this is a little more complex, but the main idea of it is instead of spreading our files over 16 different files in the project window, everything is being kept in one single file. So this will also apply to our passives, and then this will also apply to our weapon evolution system, which is stored inside the weapon or the passive data itself. Okay, let's go straight into creating the weapons script. Okay, and the first script that we're going to create is the most important script of them all, because it allows us to manage the stats of our weapon. I'll create a new script here. Obviously it's called weapon. Okay, so I've copied the script here. Okay, next let me explain what's going on with the stats object here. So if you look at what we have here, we're creating a new abstract class called weapon. Why is this abstract? Abstract classes, if something is abstract, it means that you will not be able to attach this script to a game object. So the other thing we are creating inside the weapon class is this struct called stats. So this struct here basically allows us to declare variables that will contain all of these smaller variables inside. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm gonna create also another script called the weapon data, and then I'm gonna use this struct. So what I've done here is I just created this weapon data file, and I'm gonna open this up as well. And then I'm just going to paste the script here. So weapon data is basically a scriptable object, which means that once we copy the weapon data file, what we will get is in Unity editor, right? We will get the ability to create a new weapon data like that. So these are scriptable objects. We have a couple of variables inside here, just 5 variables. We have a max level. We have an icon, which is the icon for the weapon. We have base stats, and then we have linear growth, which is an array of items that contain the same elements as the base stats over here. So this is what the weapons stats struct is supposed to allow us to do, because if you look at the weapon data script, we are using weapon stats to create the base stats variable, the linear growth variable, and the random growth variable. Of course, the last two are arrays. So this weapon stats struct is defined inside weapon itself. So we have weapon, and then we have stats. This is why the data type is weapon.stats. And this is supposed, of course, to express the stats that a weapon has. So the weapon stats struct, basically the weapon class now has nothing inside. There is just a separate stats inside. You can think of a struct as like a class. So this is like a class that is inside a class. So we have a couple of variables. We have the name, we have the description, we have projectile prefab and aura prefab, which is the attached projectile and the attached aura for the weapon. So the other thing that I have over here, of course, is the hit effect, which when the weapon hits, what effect plays. And then we have something called spawn variance, which I will get into once we create the knife. And then there are some other variables here: lifespan, damage, damage variance, etc, etc. These are all the specific stats that the weapon has. Every weapon has a whole bunch of stats. So we are representing all of these stats inside the weapon stats variable right here. All these variables inside the struct. And the other key thing that we are defining inside the weapon script, or rather the weapon.stats struct, is the plus operator. So the plus operator that we have right here is basically a definition of how the plus operator will work together with multiple stats objects. So for example, later when we create the new level up system for the weapons, every time the weapon levels up, we have to calculate the new stats for the weapon. The reason that we have adopted such a dynamic way of manipulating a weapon is because later on we're going to have passives, and then these passives will also affect our weapon. Every weapon has stats that are dynamic, and then of course you have buffs as well. So for example, some characters in Vampire Survivors, I think there is a character called Clarice that has, sorry if I pronounce the name wrong, she has a temporary area buff to all her weapons. So this means that you will have to modify the stats of the weapon based on the buff that the character has, the passives that the character has, as well as when the character levels up. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a variable called weapon stats that you can very easily operate on using the plus sign. So by having a plus sign, this makes it so that I don't have to manually calculate the value of every stat that I have inside the weapon. I can just use the plus sign, and then the logic inside the operator function will handle the rest for me. What we have here, for example, we have the name, we have the description. This is just the name and description of the stat object itself. Okay, and then you have the hit effect, which if the second item has a hit effect, then it will override the hit effect of the first item. So the name, the description, and the hit effect are the same. So for example, if I do S1 plus S2, and then I want it to be the current stat of the weapon. So what's going to happen here is that if I do this, I'll use the name in S2, I'll use the description in S2. I will also use the hit effect in S2. Okay, so the rest of the values over here are added together. Okay, sorry, the spawn variance is overridden also. The rest of the values are added together. So why is the stats operator set up this way? I'm going to show you how we can set up a simple weapon using the new weapon data system. Okay, we have this weapon data script using the struct inside the weapon class. So if I were to go to create and then do a weapon data here like that, this allows me to create new weapon data objects. So what do we have inside every individual weapon data? So let's say if I want to define the stats for the knife, what I'm going to do is, let's say the knife has 8 levels. I'm going to call this the knife, and then we will head into the Vampire Survivors wiki, and then we can find the stats for the knife. So in the knife itself, you have all these different stats here. You have the description of the knife as well. So let's say if I were to copy this, and if I were to drop this into, say, description here. Base stats will be the stats for level 1 of the weapon. The hit effect, I'll leave it empty for now. Spawn variance, I'll leave it at 0 for now. And I'm just going to fill in the rest of the stats right here. Damage variance would be... This one is not in the wiki. This is just the range that the knife will have. So for example, if I were to have damage of 6.5, a damage variance of 2, this will give the knife a damage range from 6.5 to 8.5. Area would be, if I'm not wrong, is 1. Speed is projectile speed, it's 1. Cooldown for the knife is 1 second as well. Projectile interval is beyond the first level, right? The knife shoots multiple copies of itself. So is there a delay before the knife fires multiple copies of itself? That is the projectile interval. We can retrieve this from the wiki. This is 0.1. And the knockback is 0.5. This is the number of knives that are spawned. Piercing is just 1. Max instances, this is how many copies of knife can exist in the game at once. This is 70. So for us to create the knife, we enter in the base stats, and then because we have 8 levels, we have to put multiple elements inside linear growth. So this would be level 2. So it will be fires 1 more projectile. So what happens when I enter the stats for level 2 is that this level 2 name will replace the name of the knife, and then the description will replace the current description of the knife when I level up. This has to do because later on you notice that whenever we level up, we will get the upgrade name. So it will say knife, level 1 or knife, and then level 2 and so on. Alright. So then we also have to have a description. The description will actually go inside here. So same thing for the heat effect in the spawn variant. So when we go to level 2, the values for level 2 will override the values for level 1. So for level 2, right, what difference does it make to the knife? It just fires one more projectile, right? So for the stats for level 2, you will just have to put, for number, you just have to put 1 like that. So for level 2, it just fires one more projectile, so everything will be 0 except for the number here, which is 1, because whatever that we put inside the linear growth array will be incremental, except for the name and the description and the spawn effect and heat effect. So level 3 is going to be the same thing. Level 3 is going to be fires one more projectile and then base damage up by 5. So you will repeat this cycle on and on until you fill up all 8 levels of the knife. So what is random growth? Okay, random growth is a way for us to define what would happen if we, let's say we have 8 levels, right? But then in the knife here, we only define the growth of 5. What's going to happen next is that we are going to define a random way the knife can grow. So for example, for the name and description, we can just leave it empty. And then for the values over here, let's say there are 2 ways a knife can grow, right? It can either increase in number, or it can increase in both the number and the damage. So random growth is a way for the system to find a way for the knife to continue growing even if you do not supply enough levels. So you can mostly just ignore the random growth over here and then just work on the linear growth. This is the most important one. So if you grow beyond level 5, for example, our knife is just going to randomly pick one of the elements inside here to determine how the knife can continue growing. Okay, otherwise it will always pick from the linear growth. So the random growth array over here is actually intended to work with a mechanic in Vampire Survivors, which is called limit break. So limit break allows your weapon to continue growing beyond the max level. If I would have 8 levels of knife, if I wanted it to have a limit break, we can in the future add a checkbox that says limit break, and then after the 8th level, it will automatically just draw growth data from the random growth. So for now, how this system works is that if you do not have enough levels specified, it will just randomly pick one of these ways for the weapon to grow. So all of this is made possible because the base stats, the linear growth and the random growth, they all use the weapon's struct. So this stat struct is really the baseline of this entire new weapon system. Okay, so this is the stats struct. So beyond that, we also have a get damage function. So this get damage function just generates a damage value for us. So with the weapon script set up and then the weapon data set up also, okay, the weapon data is a lot simpler. We just have a whole bunch of variables over here. We also have this behavior variable that I will talk about later. This is linked to our weapon behavior scripts. So for now, we just define an icon, we define a max level. We also have the base stats for the weapon as well as the stats of the weapon when it grows from level to level. And then if the weapon grows beyond the maximum level, we also have a set of stats for it. Okay, finally, we have this function inside weapon data called get level data. And then what this does is that this basically just allows you to, for example, if I want to get the stats of the weapon on level 3, just do a get level data on the weapon itself to get the level data of the weapon. We use this function later. So if you look at our weapon script over here, there's no code inside, it's just struct. So if we were to take away this struct, there's nothing inside. Alright, so we're gonna build more code for the weapon class later, and then we'll use the get level data function inside weapon data. Okay, so let's move on to creating the rest of the weapon class. Okay, so now that we have the weapon data script, which is where the weapons will draw data from, we will create the logic for the weapon script. So we have the summary that's added, we have the current level, we have the max level as well. Okay, so what does the weapon script do? The weapon script is supposed to manage the current status of the weapon. So whenever we attach a weapon to the character, what's going to happen is the weapon class or some child of the weapon class is going to be attached to the character, and then the weapon will come together with a weapon data, which allows the weapon to read, for example, every time the weapon levels up, what are the stats it should have. The weapon class will manage what the current level of the weapon is, what is the maximum level that the weapon can grow to. It's gonna save a copy of the owner of the weapon, because of course when the weapon deals damage, the character has a might stat, right? So the weapon will always have to read from the character's might stat to multiply the amount of damage that it does. Obviously the weapon also has a set of current stats. The current stats will store all the stats of the weapon from the base stats all the way to all the level up stats. And then of course all the power-ups and passives as well. So the current stats is a variable that basically adds all these different stats together to arrive at the stat that the weapon should have. The weapon also has a current cooldown which is protected, which means that it's not shown on the inspector. And then there is also a player movement script, which again is protected together with current stats and owner. They all protected variables. So the weapon class has an initialize function. So the initialize function is just there to start up the weapon, okay, by assigning essential data to the weapons. When the weapon starts up, okay, we are going to assign the weapon's current stats as its base stats. Again, the data variable over here is the weapon data, so we're gonna extract the base stats of the weapon and assign it to our current stats variable. And then of course we initialize the weapon. So after initialization, what happens? The key logic inside the weapon class itself is actually the update class right here. So the update class basically just tracks the cooldown of the weapon, and then whenever the cooldown of the weapon reaches 0, it's gonna call the attack function. The attack function takes a parameter here, which is number of projectiles to fire, or the number of times the weapon fires every time the cooldown finishes. Okay, again, if you recall, weapons like the knife, weapons like the whip, they fire multiple copies of the attack at higher levels. Okay, and then we have can level up, which controls whether the weapon is currently able to level up. We can add more conditions in child classes. This is a virtual function, which means that we can override this function to change the way the weapon levels up. There is also a do level up function, which checks if the weapon is able to level up. If it is not able to level up, it's gonna leave a warning. What happens when you level up a weapon? You add the data of the next level to the current level. So this plus current level here basically means that you take the level value, you increase it by 1. So if my current level is 1 and I do plus current level, this will change it to 2. Okay, so I'm gonna get the level 2 data, add it to the level 1 data, and then this will update the current stats when I level up the weapon. Okay, and finally we have a can attack function, which helps us to control whether the function is able to attack. Okay, so if you go all the way down to the attack function of the weapon, you will see that there is a attack function. Okay, again, this is virtual so that you can override it. It checks for can attack. If the weapon can attack, it's gonna update the current cooldown and then return true, otherwise it's gonna return false. Okay, finally we have get damage on the weapon. This extracts the damage from the current stats of the weapon and then it multiplies it by the might of the character. Okay, so this factors in the stats of the character to deal damage. And finally we have get stats, which just allows us to get the current stats of the character. Nothing much right here. So what we have in the weapon class is this is a blueprint for us to create logic for further weapons in the future. That's what the weapon class is supposed to help us do. So if you copy and paste it right, your code shouldn't have any errors. So when you copy and paste the code, I recommend you read through the code yourself as well and try and understand as much of it as possible. So I'll be going through the logic, but you will have to process the code yourself to be able to get a sensing of what's happening. So the key takeaway over here is you can get a sensing of what I'm doing. This will help you when you try and design your own weapons or your own infrastructure for your different genres of games in the future. Okay, so the new files for now are weapon and weapon data. Okay, so over here, let's just go through the list just to make sure that I don't miss out anything. So what does the weapon class do? Okay, it helps us to keep track of the core functionalities of the weapon, which is basically 2 roles. The weapon class helps us to handle the leveling up of the weapon. Recall that whenever we level up the weapon, we have to update the current stats by drawing the current stats from the weapon data. So the other thing the weapon class does is that it automatically handles the cooling down and triggering of the weapon's attack. So if you look at the update function under weapon, okay, whenever the update function runs every frame, it's gonna count down the current cooldown Then once the current cooldown goes below 0, it's gonna fire attack. Then what attack is gonna do is attack is going to refresh the cooldown. So this creates a cycle because in Unity, in Vampire Survivors, the weapon fires itself every time the cooldown finishes, right? Most of the functions in weapon class is marked virtual. Again, this is because the weapon class is abstract, which means that later on we're gonna create more scripts that inherit from the weapon class. And then when we want to do inheritance in our code, we will have to override some of our functions. Okay, so let's get started by creating the knife weapon. We are halfway through creating the weapon for ourselves, right? If you were following when Xavier was working on the series, he had a weapon controller and then he also had weapon behaviors. Weapon controllers are basically responsible for controlling when the weapon fires, and then weapon behavior is it just fires the projectile of the weapon. So in the case of the knife controller controls the cooldown. The knife behavior controls the projectile of the knife. Okay, so we are going to create a new weapon effect script that is going to serve as the parent class for all our weapon behavior. The two weapon effects that we are going to be having so far is an aura as well as the projectile. Okay, so if you scroll up higher in the article, for every weapon that we have, you can define a projectile and you can define the aura. Both the projectile and the aura are weapon effects. So the aura is used for the garlic. It can also be used for other scenarios, like for example the pentagram can use an aura as well. If you remember, there is a center water. Center water throws a projectile that spawns an aura. Same for the projectile. So we have many weapons which fire projectiles, right? We have the axe, we have the knife, okay, we have a whole bunch of weapons that fires projectiles and a whole bunch of weapons that spawn auras. So we want to create these as weapon effects that we can continuously reuse when we create these other weapons as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to reorganize our codes a little bit. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of scripts here from the old system, and here's what I'm going to do. I will be creating a new folder called Obsolete, and then I will be moving all of these old scripts inside the Obsolete folder. This helps us to organize our code base a little bit so that we know what scripts we are dealing with. Okay, so one thing that you can do also for these obsolete scripts is that you can just open them up and then right above the class definition of the script and just add a system.obsolete. This will be replaced by the weapon data, something like that. So if you were to add an obsolete marker into the weapon itself, if you were to head back into the project, you will see that now all the weapon scriptable objects will have an obsolete notice over here. Okay, so why don't we just delete these scripts? Because if we have an existing system and we delete the scripts inside our project, we may just break code. This is why we want to just mark a script as obsolete first. And then later on when we have more time, or later on when we completely shift over to the new weapon system, then we can go about and start removing the scripts that we have marked obsolete. So what you want to do is you want to just find all of these scripts that you have refiled into the obsolete folder and then just do yourself a favor and then mark them as obsolete one by one. So now that we have reorganized our weapons folder, I will create a new folder called weapon effects under the scripts folder. Under weapon effects here, this new folder, I can create the new weapon effect script. Okay, what is inside the summary? This is a game object that is spawned whenever a weapon fires. So projectiles, auras. Later on, we're going to create these things called pulses as well. So different weapons spawn different weapon effects. Alright, so in the weapon effect, it's just going to store a couple of things. It's just going to store a way for us to get the weapon damage. Okay, so the weapon effect just stores a copy of the player stats, which is who owns the weapon, as well as the weapon itself. So again, this is an abstract class, which means that we are not going to be using this component directly. Okay, so let me just save this and then we will move on to the next piece of script that we are going to be copying. So the next piece of script is going to be the projectile script. So the projectile script defines the behavior for projectile. So the first projectile we're going to be creating is the knife projectile. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is this projectile script is going to be kind of like an all-purpose script that we can modify accordingly to modify the behavior of our projectiles. Okay, let me show you what I mean. So after we copy and paste the projectile script, we will be able to use the projectile to set up a prefab. So let's say for the knife, the projectile component will have 3 different variables that you can choose from. You have damage source, you have auto aim, and then you also have rotation speed. Alright, so what the damage source variable does is that this controls how the knockback is calculated for the enemy when the projectile hits. If you look at our coding streams, right, we created a couple of weapons, and then one of the weapons that we've created was the whip. So if you look at the projectile for the whip, okay, you notice that when the whip fires, right, whip actually pushes one of the bats closer to us, which means that the knockback is not working properly, right? For knockback to work properly for some projectiles, we will have to determine where the damage source of the projectile is coming from. Okay, so if we were to look at this picture over here, when the knife hits the bat over here, okay, the knockback is gonna be pushing the bat in this direction. So whereas if we have the damage source as owner, when the knife hits the bat, what's gonna happen is that it's gonna be pushed in this direction, and this is because the knockback is calculated from the owner if you choose owner as damage source. So we have 2 options for how the projectile performs knockback, based on the projectile itself or based on the owner. This has to do with how different weapons work. So for example, if we were to use the whip as an example, right? So the whip, when it fires, it's just gonna be something like this, right? The position is gonna be right here. Okay, so if the whip fires and let's say we have a bat that is right here, the bat and the whip is gonna be causing the knockback of the whip to be going in this direction, okay, which is towards the player character itself. This is obviously not ideal. This is happening because the damage source of the whip projectile is being calculated from the whip itself. So for the whip, we will not be using the center of the projectile as a damage source. Instead, for the whip, damage source will always be on the player, so that even if the bat is over here, it will always be pushed back. This is why the projectile has a damage source attribute, so that for different kinds of projectiles, for projectiles that are close range, we are able to set it so that no matter where the projectile touches, it will always push the enemy back away from the player. Second one is has auto aim. It has auto aim basically allows us to control whether the projectile fires in a certain direction. So for example, for the knife wouldn't have auto aim. Okay, so the knife has no auto aim, but something like the fire one, for example, will have auto aim. Why? Because the fire one always finds one random enemy and the projectile goes towards it, right? Okay, so the fire one would be an example of a weapon that has auto aim. And finally, we have rotation speed as well. Rotation speed just allows us to make our projectile rotate over time. So I've created a new projectile script here, and then let's go into the Visual Studio and just gonna copy and paste the script. Again, you are encouraged to read through the script yourself and try and get an understanding of it. As I read through the script that someone else has written, I'm gonna be writing comments to try and figure out what the hell the guy is trying to do for each chunk of code. Okay, so writing the comments helps me to understand an existing piece of script. So for the projectile script right here, okay, we have all the different variables defined. So this damage source here, we first declare an enum of projectile and owner. Later on, this is a dropdown that gives us 2 options, projectile and owner, which I've just explained a couple of minutes ago. Okay, has auto aim, same thing, I've explained this. Rotation speed, I've also explained this. Okay, one thing to note is it inherits from weapon effect, very important. Okay, and then you have all these variables right here. You have rigid body, so the projectile will be using a rigid body to move around. This is because the projectile will need to detect collisions with other objects. This piercing attribute basically controls how many times the projectile will be able to go through enemies. So if I have a piercing value of 5, the projectile will be able to hit 5 enemies before it goes away. So when the projectile starts, what it does is it tries to retrieve the stats of the weapon that it belongs to. Obviously, we are going to retrieve the rigid body as well because the projectile will be using the rigid body to move around. And then over here, we have 2 types of behaviors for the projectile, depending on whether the projectile is a kinematic or the projectile is a regular rigid body. Let me just refer you to an article if you want to get a sense of what a kinematic and what a regular rigid body is. So if you go into a rigid body over here, So there are three options here: dynamic, kinematic, and static. You really only have two options because static means that the rigid body cannot move. So whenever you want to control a rigid body, there are two options that you have: dynamic and then kinematic. Dynamic will react to forces, which means that if I were to push an object that is dynamic, it's going to move away. Whereas something that is kinematic will always move in the same direction. What this means is that when you create your projectiles in the Vampire Survivors series, you have two options. Okay, if you were to set the rigid body of the projectile as dynamic, it means that you maybe want the projectile to bounce around, or whereas let's say you have something like a knife, okay, you would prefer to use it as a kinematic. So whether you want it to be dynamic or rigid or kinematic is up to you. The projectile script handles both behaviors. Okay, so if the rigid body is dynamic, it's going to apply a force to the rigid body. If the rigid body is kinematic, then it will have to be driven by code. Okay, so if you look at the article, let's go back to the article again. Kinematic rigid bodies, they are driven by code. So you cannot just set a velocity for the rigid body and expect it to move. You have to move it frame by frame. Okay, whereas for a regular rigid body, if you just apply a velocity to it, you can let the Unity physics engine handle the rest. So if the rigid body is dynamic, which means that it's not a kinematic, we are just going to apply a velocity and then let Unity handle the movement of the projectile for us. Okay, whereas if it's a kinematic, we are gonna have to drive the movement ourselves right here and move the projectile for ourselves every frame. After this is done, it will calculate using the stats of the projectile. It will also expand the projectile based on what the area stat of the projectile is. Notice that in Vampire Survivors, for some weapons, right, as the level of the weapon grows, the weapon becomes bigger and bigger. So this is because the area increases, and then when the area increases, we will just increase the scale of our projectile. Okay, so this makes everything a lot easier to handle. We save the piercing stat, and then we set the projectile to destroy itself after a certain amount of time. And then we also do this thing where if the projectile has auto aim, we will call this function called acquire auto aim facing. And what this does is that basically what auto aim does is it just finds all the enemies on screen, and then it picks a random enemy, and then it points the projectile towards the enemy. That's all it does. That's for acquire auto aim facing. And finally, we have on trigger enter 2D, which will detect two kinds of enemy. So whenever an enemy touches the projectile, or whenever something that is breakable touches the projectile, we will do something to it. So if an enemy touches it, we will deal damage to the enemy, and then we will of course give it the source so that it can apply knockback. Knockback is covered in part 13 of our tutorial series, so you can go and have a look at the video. And then it will get the stats of the weapon. We need the stats because we need to retrieve the hit effect. So we deal damage, reduce number of piercing. If we have a hit effect assigned, we will spawn the hit effect and we'll destroy it after 5 seconds. And then if it's a breakable object, or if it's a prop, we'll just deal damage. Again, we'll reduce the piercing, and then we'll play the hit effect as well. And finally, after we finish running through all this logic, if the piercing value of the projectile is less than 0, we will remove the projectile from the game. In the old system, for every weapon that you create, you will have to create one new behavior script for the weapon. Whereas with the new system, we have generic classes. So for example, the projectile class we will be able to use for every projectile inside our game. I'm very sure that this will help to make the entire system a lot more easy to use. Okay, so for the knife projectile, once we have the projectile script, we can head to the prefabs folder. Okay, I'm just gonna put it inside assets, prefabs, weapons for now. So we will create a new knife. Let me find a copy of the knife here. This guy, right? So let's drop it onto the scene. This knife here, you will want it to be, let's call it a knife. Projectile. I'm gonna attach this weapon to the knife projectile here. I'm gonna set the form back to 0, and let's point this knife to the right. Then we can prefab this whole thing. So for the knife projectile here, make sure it's pointing to the right. This is very important because this has to do with the rotation of the projectile. I'm gonna prefab the knife projectile, and we're gonna add a projectile script. So for the knife, it's always gonna be flying on a set path. So then we just set it to kinematic. And then we auto aim is, there's no auto aim, the knife doesn't rotate also, so this will be unchecked, and then 0, 0. So the last thing we will need for the knife is we will need to add a box collider, and we can just adjust the collider. This is the hitbox of the knife, and we can just put it to be at the blade area like that. So make sure that you save the prefab by going to overrides and apply all, so that this prefab here is updated. So we'll be coming back to using this knife projectile later once we create a knife projectile weapon. So now that we've set it up, we can head all the way back to weapon script and then just uncomment this. This will allow us to assign a projectile prefab to our weapon, which means if we were to go back to our scriptable object for the knife, I have it here, but you should really put it inside your scriptable object folder. Okay, this is my knife weapon. So then now, because we enabled the projectile prefab here, you are able to assign the prefab and then find the knife projectile and just drop it inside here. For the subsequent levels, I will not have to modify the knife projectile because it will always use the base stats projectile. Only if I want to, let's say, have a different projectile for level 2, I will create a different prefab and then assign it over here. Okay, so the next thing that we have to do, now that we have gotten the knife projectile to work, we will need to expand upon the weapon class to create this thing called the projectile weapon script. So the projectile weapon script, okay, I wouldn't say it's shorter than the weapon script, but because it expands upon the weapon class, we do not have to code as many things as compared to the weapon class. Right now we're gonna write this script for the knife itself, but later on you will be able to modify this just a little bit so that you can apply this to the axe and to, let's say, the magic wand, etc, etc. Okay, I have a little animated gif here of multiple projectiles. So the projectile weapon's main role is to basically handle the firing of multiple knives. Okay, and how is it done? The projectile weapon script inherits from weapon, and there are two variables that it handles: current attack interval and current attack count. Okay, what is current attack interval? That is the time between two projectiles. Okay, if you look at the knife that we have in Vampire Survivors, the knives don't come up instantaneously, right? Because if they did, they would all be in the same position. So every time the knife comes up, there is a short wait before the other knife comes up. So the interval is 0.1 seconds. Okay, so between two knives, there's 1/10 of a second. Okay, so this is the attack interval. Okay, and then there is the current attack count, which is the number of times that this attack will happen. So under the update function, we override the update function from the weapon class, and we call the weapon class's update function. What does it do? This will provide us with the attacking, right, whenever the weapon cools down. So we want the projectile weapon to be able to fire in two scenarios. The first scenario, whenever the knife cools down or the weapon cools down, and the second scenario when the weapon is currently firing, which means that there is an interval that is set. So in the second condition that the weapon is able to fire, okay, we have current attack interval greater than 0 right here. If it's greater than 0, what we will do is we will try and reduce the current attack interval, and when we reduce it, if it goes below 0, it will also fire an attack. So there are two ways the weapon can fire: when it's on cooldown and when it's in the middle of attacking. Under the can attack function over here, we add an additional condition here so that if the weapon has more than one attack that is currently firing, it will always be able to attack. So if you recall in the original weapon script, we have a can attack function right here that only allows the weapon to fire whenever the cooldown on the weapon is less than 0. And then in this condition in here, what we do is we allow the weapon to attack if there is more than one attack that is currently being fired by the weapon. Okay, and then under the attack function over here, what it does is it does a few things. The first thing here that it does is it tries to make the code a little bit more idiot-proof, in the sense that if you forget to assign a projectile prefab, there will be a message. So when you look at my code for this part here, you will find a lot of debug log or debug log warning or debug log errors. And these are basically just a way for us to document, to notify the user whenever there is an issue. And if no projectile is fired, we will just reset the cooldown of the weapon, and then we will just leave a message. Okay, you don't have to reset the cooldown of the weapon, this is optional. Okay, but then after that, we also return false. The return false here doesn't really do anything because we don't use the attack function to check for anything. But one thing that we can do if we return a boolean with our attack is that we are able to check whether the attack has succeeded or failed whenever we call the attack function. This may be useful in the future, but for now this is just something that I left there because it's just for the future in case we want to check whether an attack is successful or an attack failed. Right now we don't have to check it, so the boolean actually does nothing. So if there is a projectile prefab assigned, then our code is able to get here. And then in this part of the code, we check whether we're able to attack. If we cannot attack, again we return false. The meat of this function over here is the get spawn angle function, and then of course the instantiate function over here, which spawns a copy of the projectile. Before we spawn a copy of the projectile, what we do is we will get the spawn angle of the projectile. So the spawn angle is something that when we create the other weapons like the X or like the fire one or whatever, right, the spawn angle allows us to determine where the projectile is facing. And where the projectile is facing is important because in the projectile script, we have made it so that the projectile will always move towards the right hand side. Okay, if you head over to projectile and then you go to the start function here, we are always setting the projectile to move towards the right side of the projectile. Okay, so when we spawn the projectile, we will get the spawn angle, and then we will spawn the projectile and make it face the spawn angle. So after we do that, we will go to the prefab and then notice that the weapon effect script has an owner as well as a weapon. Remember that the projectile is a weapon effect, which means that the projectile will also have a weapon and an owner. What this means is that when I create the projectile, what I want to do is I want to assign the weapon of the projectile to be this, because we are inside the projectile weapon script, right? So what we are doing is we're telling the prefab that the projectile weapon is its weapon that owns the projectile, and then this is the owner that spawned the projectile. Okay, this is because the projectile uses the weapon to determine the damage it should deal, and then the owner is used to calculate the knockback. So this refreshes the cooldown, and then it reduces the number of attacks that we have to fire. So when the attack fires, right, whenever an attack fires, we will go ahead and also trigger the next attack. So let's say if we have 3 knives that are being fired, the first knife will trigger the second knife will trigger the third knife. So if the attack count is more than 0, we will have to trigger the next attack by setting the attack count to be equals to the current attack count, which is current attack count is whatever that we are recording here. So we will update the current attack count, and then we will update the current attack interval. This is if we still have more than one attack that is running, and then after that we end the function by returning true, because if we have gotten to this part of the code and we have spawned the prefab, the attack is successful. So as for the get spawn angle, right, this is a function that we have created so that later on, if we want to create other weapons like the X, we can just modify the spawn angle to change the trajectory of the weapon that we have. So for the knife itself, right, the weapon is going to be calculated from where the player character is moving. So if you recall in the player movement script, we record the last move direction of the player. So then to get the angle of that, we just gotta get the Y and the X value of where the player is moving towards, and then we just gotta do an arctangent to get the angle and radians, and then after that we will have to convert this to degrees. And finally, get spawn offset. So basically we have a get spawn offset, which is here, so the spawn variance right here. What this does is that this will create a little box around the player, and then this box over here is where the knives can spawn. So the bigger the spawn variance, the bigger the variance of the knife's position. So there's this little diagram over here that shows you how when you change the different values, this will change where the position of the box is. This will change the area of the spawn variance, and because the character is able to move around, right, diagonally, we will use this little button in over here to rotate the box as well. The whole explanation is about 2 minutes. Okay, so you can just find this video and you can watch it to get a sense of the math. And the next step for us would be to make use of this projectile weapon. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is what do we do with this new projectile weapon script? So in the old system, we would have had to create a new weapon controller prefab for every weapon that we have. Okay, but for our new system, it's going to be automated by us going into the weapon data script. Okay, if we look at the weapon data script that we have right here, we actually also have this behavior attribute. And this behavior attribute allows us to control what kind of weapon this is. Okay, let me show you what I mean. Okay, we're gonna be creating a new editor folder inside our project. And then inside this new editor folder, we are going to be creating a new script. And this script will be called Weapon Data Editor. And what this weapon data editor script does is it allows us to modify how the weapon data is presented to us. So if I were to create weapon data editor, this will modify how the inspector shows the fields inside weapon data. So what we want to do with the weapon data editor is, okay, so we want our weapon data to display this drop down over here. And this drop down is actually, notice here I have a projectile weapon. This is because we've just created a projectile weapon script like that. Okay, if we were to create more weapon scripts, you will have more options over here. Okay, so right now if I were to select the projectile weapon, you will see this will again display all the stats that the weapon has. Okay, so in the future when we have more kinds of weapons, okay, you will see that we will be able to have more stuff to select. Okay, we will cover how to create all these different weapons in part 16. So what this behavior does is that when I create a new weapon, I can right away just go into the weapon data, and then just by selecting the behavior, I'm able to modify how the weapon works. Okay, so let's go through what's going on in the code. So what we are doing here is we're creating a custom editor, and then that's why it extends the editor class. And then inside the editor class, the main function we want to pay attention to actually is the onInspector GUI. What we have in our interface here, what we actually want to do is we want to just have the default inspector interface, but we want a little bit of extra. We just want this extra drop down on top. Yeah, and everything else is the default stuff. So the draw default inspector here just draws the default way the inspector is drawn. But then before we do that, right, we will just add a new pop-up. This line here is what adds the pop-up. So the pop-up has multiple options, right? So the options will go from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So this will be an integer. And then the pop-up's name will be called behavior. And then this is the default value that is gonna go here. Then this is the options that we have. So then if we select something other than 0, so 0 will be none. So if we select none, nothing shows up. But if we select anything other than 0, then all the stats of the weapon will show. This is why we have this selected weapon subtype more than 0. Then we draw the default inspector below, but before we do that, we have the name of the class that we want. We want to save it inside the behavior field, and then we want to save this because recall that this is actually an asset. So whenever we make modifications to it, we have to save it in our hard drive. And this set30 here allows us to save the weapon data. So what's going on here is inside the onEnable function. Okay, whenever we select the weapon data, what the editor is going to do is it's going to look through the entire code base that we have to find all the subclasses of weapon. So it finds all the subclasses of weapon and it puts them into an array. Okay, I got this code from ChatGPT. And then we add a none option in front. This will be 0. And then after that, we set the weapon subtype to whatever is set in the weapon data at the moment. Okay, so all this is just logic to create just this drop down, right? Yeah, and with this drop down over here, we can now properly set the knife to be a projectile weapon, and then we can set the rest of the stats. So that's the weapon behavior portion. You can read the article to get the explanation that I just ran through with you. So, okay, we are still a couple of steps away before we can test out the knife, and that is because, again, there are so many moving parts for our system. The next thing we have to do is create an item superclass. What it does here is that the item superclass will provide us a parent class that we can subclass weapons and passives. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So if you look at Vampire Survivors game, the two kinds of items you can have in Vampire Survivors are passives and weapons. So we are going to create a superclass for it, item that will store behavior that is shared among the weapon and passive. And then after that, we will have to create the passive before we are able to test out the system. This is because the system works as a whole. So when we modify the weapons portion of the system, we will also have to recreate the rest of the system before we are able to start using it. I'm gonna create the Obsolete folder over here and then just drop everything inside. Okay, and then I'll create our new item script. Okay, so what do we want to use with in the item script? We primarily just want to manage the current and the max level. So what we want to do with the item script is, if you look at the weapon script that we have, we had to manage the current level and the max level for the weapon. We want to move this functionality over to the item script. Okay, so by creating the leveling functionality in item, we will then be able to pass it down to the weapon as well as to the passives that we will be creating. So item works together with a data set called item data, which we will go into later. The other thing that we want to pass over back to item, okay, in the weapon script, we have the owner. We want to pass over the management of the owner to the item script as well. So when we initialize the item, what we're going to do is just retrieve the max level and then find the owner. Okay, both are behaviors that used to be managed by weapon that we are now handing over to the item script. The other thing that we will be doing is we'll be transferring the can level up function from the weapon over to the item. And then do level up, we will just set this to true. And then the reason we are creating the item class also is because later on we're going to be coding weapon evolution. And then weapon evolution is going to involve items, because both passives and weapons are going to be able to evolve. So we cannot just code the weapon evolution code into the weapon itself. And then finally, under the item class, we also have onEquip and onUnequip function. These are both functions that automatically fire whenever you add or remove an item from the character's inventory. For now, the item class is gonna be helping us to manage the leveling up of items for our items in the game. Next thing you want to do is subclass our weapon to item. If you want to understand a little bit better of how subclassing works, there is an article that we have on the blog that you can read through to find, search for inheritance. You should be able to find an article about making use of inheritance in game programming. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these modifications to my code. So I'm basically doing whatever the item class does, but I'm doing a little bit of something extra. And what is the extra thing I'm doing with weapon is I have to manage the stat, because the item doesn't manage the stats. And then of course, I'll check if I can level up. So one last thing that we have to deal with is if you go to item, you'll see item data here has an error. And this is because we have to define the item data class as well. Okay, so the item data class is just a parent class for all weapons and passive items, in the same way that the item is a parent for the weapon. And basically, item data just contains the icon and the max level, which used to be contained by weapon data. Okay, so why are we subclassing item and item data? The reason is because we have to create passives. So we subclass weapon and weapon data into item and item data so that we can later also use the item data and item classes as a parent class for our passive and our passive data classes, okay, which is what we are doing right here. Before we create the passives, we actually have to create a new character data scriptable object. This is so that the passives class can work properly. Okay, so the main reason why the character data scriptable object is created is because so that the character data has this struct inside here, and we need this struct to be able to create our passives. Okay, let's go through whatever's in the character data script together. Character data is meant to replace character scriptable object. Character scriptable object allows us to create scriptable objects for the player, like that. So what we're gonna do in the redesigned character data, we just want to replace the stats that we have over here with a new set of stats that's inside a struct that we can also use for our passives. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna replace the starting weapons variable from a game object, aka a prefab, to using weapon data. So it's a pretty simple change. The changes are all highlighted in the article here. So I'm gonna obsolete the character scriptable object. So this will be obsolete. Character scriptable object goes inside here, and then character data is meant to replace it. So let's go through what the stats struct is meant to do. So previously in our weapon script, we also had a struct like that where we have stats, and then the entire variable type is weapon.stats. We had that because we wanted a way to manage our stats as an entire object. So inside the stats struct, we have all the different stats that the character has. So the character is supposed to have 19 different stats. So as we go on and develop more stats for our character, we can just add to the stats struct over here, and it will be automatically added to our character and to anywhere else that's using the character data.stat struct. So over here we have a constructor, and this constructor is just there for us to set a default value for these values here. And more importantly, we have this plus operator, which works the same as the plus operator in our weapon.stats struct. It allows us to add multiple stats objects together. When we code the passives later, we are gonna have to add stats together. So we're gonna add the base stats of the character with our passive. So with the set struct over here, with objects that use the character data stats struct, we will be able to do something like this. So for example, with actual stats equals to base stats plus the passive item stat increment. So later on when we do the passives, you will see this in action. Okay, so once we have the character data struct, what you will see is that you will become able to create a new type of object called CharacterData scriptable object. There we go. So when we have the character data, you see now the stats are here. For us to assign the weapon to a character, previously we would have to create a prefab and then put the weapon inside. Now we just have to put whatever, this is the knife asset that we've created. So you just put a knife and then you select the sprite for the player and then you give the player a name and then you set the stats for the player. Okay, so you will see the stats here are pre-filled. The reason that the stats here are pre-filled is because I have a constructor for character data and then it sets these default values. And then of course when I declare the variable for the character data itself, I set a default value for the stat. So then this sets the max health and then the rest of the values are set using the default values for the optional parameters, which is how we get the values over here. So with the character data all set up, we are now able to move on and create our passives. But before we create our passives, we have to also update this class called the CharacterSelector. Okay, what is the CharacterSelector? CharacterSelector is just a class that is used inside our menu screen. So basically the CharacterSelector, its job is just when we click on one of these buttons, it will set the character data here to the appropriate character data. So we've got to update this class because it uses character scriptable object, which is obsolete. Alright, so I would also go into the character scriptable object and just label the script as obsolete. So system obsolete, this has to be replaced by character data. So in our script over here, we are going to the character selector class, and then from here we just gotta update the class over here from character scriptable object to character data, and then same thing over here. So over here it's character data as well, and then this will remain the same. So one thing that has changed in our code over here is the get data function. So previously it was just one line, and then right now it has a couple of extra lines. Okay, once you do that, just save the script. So the moment we change the character selector to use character data, we will get another error on player stats, and that's because now the player stats class doesn't use character data, it uses character scriptable object. Okay, so if we scroll further down, the other thing we want to update beforehand is that we have a function in GameManager that also uses character scriptable object. So let's go to the GameManager. There's only one line in GameManager that uses character scriptable object. So we just gotta hop on over here and then just find it. Where character scriptable object is right here, and then just replace it. So now that the character selector is updated, the GameManager is updated. Okay, we'll recreate passive items. So what do passives do? So we want our passives to offer a similar interface to our weapon stats system. So we have two scripts over here. We have passive and then we also have passive data, right? So once you copy the passive and passive data, okay, so how the passive system works is that the passive data will serve as the data for our passive weapons. And then what we want is for an interface like this. Is similar to the weapons interface, but it's also much simpler. So the stats over here and the growth, they are the same thing. Okay, so what a passive is essentially is it's just a boost to our character stats. In passive script, the main thing that we have here is we have this thing called a modifier. So every passive will confer a modifier to the character. Confer means give. So every passive will give a modifier to the player character. And the modifier is just going to have three things. It's going to have a name, it's going to have a description, and it's going to have all the boosts that it gives to the player. The boost variable uses CharacterData.stats. Okay, this is defined in character data, right? So why does it use CharacterData.stats? Because you can add the stats together, right? Okay, later on in player stats, you will see how this is implemented. So we have modifiers, and then basically we have in the passive we have all the current boosts that the passive is currently applying to the player. So when we initialize the passive, we just retrieve the boosts that the passive confers. And then, of course, we have get boost, which returns the current boost that the passive confers. In our weapon, you will see that we have the base stats over here, and then the stats in level 2 adds to the stats in level 1, and then the stats to level 3 adds to the existing stats, and so on and so forth, right? So our passives are going to work the same way, where we have the base stats, and then level 2 will add to the base stat. Okay, it adds 0.1 movement speed to the base stats. Level 3 will add a set of boosts to the base stats as well. So then whenever we want to retrieve the boosts for the passive, we will just have to access current boosts, which is the sum of all the bonuses that the passive confers from level 1 all the way to the level that you're at. Alright, so this is the entire system. It's just to use the modifier. So when we level up, basically we're just adding the boosts of that current level to all the boosts that we already have from the passive. And then if you cannot level up, of course it returns false, and then it mentions why this is failing. Okay, the base do level up, this refers to the level up function inside the item class. So do level up actually does nothing, so we don't have to call base dot do level up. You can call it, doesn't really do anything, so it's fine whether you call it or not. Okay, this is probably just an oversight on my part. Okay, let me just go through passive data. Passive data is going to be very straightforward. It just stores the base stats and then it stores the levels. Okay, the rest of the data on the passive data game object is inherited from the item superclass. Okay, the evolution data, you're not gonna have it first. We will implement this later on when we add some more code for the item class. Okay, so the passives class, what it does is that when I set out to redesign the passives class, I wanted to avoid the same problem that we had with our weapon system, which was that for every single level that your weapon has, you have to create one prefab and then one scriptable object. And also the other benefit of the new passive system is that for the old passive system, we also had to create a new script for every passive that we have. We didn't have an implementation where we use like the stats object. So then every passive had to manually specify which stat it affected, and then it just changed the stat directly. So because it changes the stat directly, there was also the drawback that if you remove the passive item, for some reason if you want to remove the wings item from the player's inventory, you cannot undo the effect. Because the current moves here, the player will be affected by a lot of other multipliers. So if you multiply a lot of stuff inside, and maybe you have power-ups and stuff, right? So it's gonna be difficult to get back the original value. So later you will see how I handle this when we rework the player stats. Okay, we actually store a copy of the base stats of the player, and then we will actively recalculate the player stats based on the base stats and the number of passive items that the player has. Okay, this will make it so that it's easy for us to add a buff and remove a buff from the player character later on. Last thing we gotta do is we will add this recalculate stats function to the player stats script. Okay, here's how we're gonna do it. Under player stats, we will add a recalculate stats. Okay, this recalculate stats script later on is gonna be used to recalculate the stat of our player character. Okay, so it's gonna find the same spot, or you can put it any spot that you want. Okay, you don't necessarily have to put it here. Anywhere that you want, you can put it. This is called by the player inventory class. Later on, you will see in the player inventory class, that is the new inventory system. Whenever we add a passive, we will actually recalculate the stats of the player. So once we modify the player stats with this new function here, we are ready to code the new inventory system. New inventory system is a simplification of the old inventory system. The old system had a lot of different variables, whereas the new system has only 5 variables. It's meant to replace the inventory manager, so I'm going to move the inventory manager to obsolete. And then I'm going to just create a new script here called player inventory. Okay, so I'll just copy and paste it here. Let me just get the player stats script as well, and I'll explain both of them together. Okay, so with these two parts assembled, let's run through the script for the play inventory first. Play inventory is meant to replace the inventory manager right here. Okay, so you can uncheck the inventory manager, and then you can add, this should be the player inventory script. Okay, so the play inventory script's improvement over the inventory manager is that the inventory manager, how it works is that for all the weapons, you have 3 variables here: weapon slots, weapon levels, and weapon UI slot. Okay, why do we need to store a copy of the weapon levels? Because the weapon slots themselves, remember the weapons are all different prefab, so the weapons themselves don't track which level they are in. With our new system, the weapon tracks our levels, so we no longer have to store the weapon level. Okay, which makes things a lot easier. And then weapon slots and weapon UI slots. Okay, what does weapon UI slot refer to? It refers to the 6 slots that we have on the UI that shows our item icons. Alright, so with the new system, what I've done is I've simplified the interface of this. The UI slots, instead of them being separate variables, I've combined them so they use the same. Okay, so under play inventory here, you will see that weapon slots here has nothing inside, so I'm going to add 6 items. Okay, so for every slot that we have, we actually have 2 things that we can assign here. We have item and then we have image. The item we will just leave it empty because as we get items, this will become assigned. But we will have to find the slots and assign them into the weapon slots for the weapon inventory. Okay, that's all here. Okay, so we have 6 slots, right? So we only need 0 to 5, that's 6 slots. Okay, so we do the same for the passives, which have the same setup. So passive, we have 6 slots as well, and then we have to assign the UI element. Okay, I'm gonna automate the process of assigning the UI elements later on. Okay, somewhere down the line in the series, we can automate this so that the whole system becomes easier to use. Okay, what's going on here is in the play inventory script, we have a new struct called slots. Okay, so let me use the article, it's easier to explain using the article. So what does the slot struct do? Okay, this is the one of the main changes to the new inventory system. Okay, is we have a class called slot. This is a nested class, and this is supposed to represent a slot inside the inventory. Okay, what does a slot contain? It contains an item, right? Item can be either a weapon or it can be a passive. Inside every slot, we have to track the UI equivalent of the slot, because whenever we obtain a new item, we have to assign the image of the item to the UI element, right? So this is the UI element that contains the sprite of the item, and this is the item itself. Okay, inside the class, I've also created a couple of functions that we can use to assign the slot. So we can assign an item to a slot, and by assigning the item to the slot, we are also assigning the image of the slot. So we assign the item, and then we check if the item is a weapon. If it is, then we will convert the item to a weapon, and then assign the icon of the item to the UI image. Okay, same thing for passive. We convert this to a passive, and then we assign the icon of the passive to the UI element. Okay, and then we leave a message here that says assign the item to the player. We also have a function to clear the slot, so we can assign an item to the slot. We can also remove items from the slot. And then thirdly, we have a function to check whether the slot is empty. These are just functions for convenience, because whenever we assign an item or whenever we remove the item, we also have to update the UI. So we are just making the action of updating the UI together with updating the item itself. Alright, and then when we assign the item, we will look into the item, or we will look into the data of the item to retrieve the icon. Okay, I've explained the slots. Okay, I've also explained how these 3 are combined into 1, and then these 3 are combined into 1. And then for weapon upgrade options, why is it changed to available weapons? Okay, in the new system, all you gotta do to determine what weapons are available for you to upgrade when you level up, you just gotta add the list. Okay, so later on when we create all the different weapons, we can just assign different weapons, the weapon data of these different weapons to the available weapons, and then these weapons will show up in your level up script. This is different from the old system where you had to do the same thing. Alright, you had to do the same thing, but the interface was more complex. Okay, so for every weapon that you have to add the level 1 prefab of the weapon. You also have to add the weapon data of the weapon, and then you have to index all of them from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Okay, this makes it a little more cumbersome, right? Because you have to assign a lot of stuff just for one weapon. Why do that when you can have a system where you just have to assign the weapon data? This is how the play inventory script was recoded. Okay, same thing for the passives. You just have to assign the passive data right now. Okay, a big quality of life These variables are provided by the following lines in the new play inventory script. We just declare a list of weapon data and we declare a list of passive data. Okay, so there are new functions in the play inventory script as well. Okay, in the old inventory manager, one of the main benefits of the new play inventory script is in the old weapon inventory manager, whenever you wanted to add a weapon, you had to supply two arguments. Okay, a slot as well as the weapon prefix. Okay, so this was a little difficult because then whenever you want to add a weapon from, let's say, from the treasure chest or from somewhere else, okay, every script is gonna have to define its own code to identify which slots are free. So this has been changed so that now you use the add function, and the add function will just require the item data. Automatically it will find an empty slot for you, and automatically it will create a game object for you, so you do not have to create a prefab to contain the item itself. Okay, so in the old system, because we had to identify the slot index that is empty ourselves, in player stats we also had to have a spawn weapon function, because this spawn weapon function, what it does is it tries to find an empty slot before it assigns the weapon. Okay, this job has been relegated to the new inventory management system, because the new inventory management system uses this new function called add, which automatically finds an empty slot for you. So there's also a remove function. So in the old inventory manager script, there wasn't a remove function, so there was no way for you to remove a weapon. This has been rectified. Later on, when we do weapon evolution, right, the evolution will have to remove our active weapon. So for example, if you combine garlic and you combine Palmarola, the garlic is removed and replaced with the soul eater. So lastly, the weapon evolution functions in the old inventory manager have also been removed. This is because we will handle this in the item class later. Okay, so finally we get to player stats. Okay, so in player stats, what we are doing is we are just doing two main things. First thing is that we are updating all the character scriptable object to refer to character data, and then we are also changing how the stats of the player are recorded. So previously, the stats of the player, they are recorded inside individual variables, so you have to set all of these individually. Okay, now everything is set inside the CharacterData.stat. So what this means is that your player stats are actually a base stats and then an actual stats. Okay, you don't have to set this. Okay, later on these will be set by the character data. Okay, so why do we have two sets of stats? Okay, as I have talked about before, we need a set of the base stats of the character so that we can recalculate the stats of the character, because we have to recount all the passive boosts, all the power-ups, etc, etc. If we do not recount the stats when we remove a passive, things will get messy very quickly. Okay, so one of the main things is we store a copy of base stats, and then we also store a copy of the actual stats, and then we use the recalculate stats function, which is right here, okay, to calculate the actual stats. Okay, so whenever the player receives a new passive, we will call recalculate stats, and what it does is that it will set the actual stats to base stats, and then it will run through every passive in the player inventory, and then it will add the boosts of the passive to the actual stats. Okay, so the stats are constantly being recalculated, and by recalculating the stats like that, we make sure that the boosts always apply the correct stat. Okay, so this is one of the changes. The other change is just once we do that, then we just have to remove the references to the old stat system, which again was individual variables. Okay, and then the other thing was, of course, we replaced the inventory manager with the play inventory. So then there's one whole section of the code where we are just updating all the getters and setters of our existing stats, right? Because in the old player stats code, we had an entire region where we had getters and setters for all our stats. Okay, this has been retained temporarily because otherwise it will break too many parts of our other codes. Okay, so later on when we get to these other codes, we might remove all these getters and setters. Okay, right now they are just there for backward compatibility. So the last thing that changes in the player stats is some of the old functions have been removed. We have spawn passive item, and then we also have spawn weapon. Okay, these have been removed because now you just gotta go to the player inventory and then just call the add function to add either a passive or to add a weapon. Okay, now that we have everything set up, we can start to test out our new weapon system. So first thing we will have to do is we have to head over to the menu screen now, and we will have to update the button here. So there's gonna be a missing character selector here because just now we changed the character selector's function, right? So now we just have to reselect the select character function, and then we have to assign our character data. Okay, I'm gonna hide the other button for now because we don't have a garlic character set up here. Okay, so maybe I'm just gonna go here and just set a sprite for the character as well. So okay, maybe I'll just It's just a random sprite, alright. I don't know what to assign there. Okay, I'm gonna just put the knife inside a scriptable object here, and then I'm just gonna get this to be obsolete, and then I'll put all the old weapons inside. And then now I can move my knife, scriptable objects folder. So this knife shouldn't be in the scripts folder. I left it in the scripts folder in the last stream, so I'm just gonna drop it in weapons here. Okay, so I'm just dropped it into the weapons folder under scriptable objects. So we have all the obsolete old weapon systems, and then we have the new knife. So you can also create a couple of passives if you want. Okay, let's maybe just do it together. So I'm just gonna obsolete the old passive system, old passive weapons. Then let's create a new passive together, right? I haven't shown you how to do that. So for the passives, maybe let's say wings. Okay, so passives are very easy to use. Okay, you just gotta assign a, you just have to assign a sprite to them. Where's my sprite? Somewhere. Okay, let's just drop the shield inside as a sprite. Okay, and then max level is 8. This is wings. Red bull gives. I don't know what the description is. You're gonna have to go into Vampire Survivors' site and then find the description. Alright, move speed is 0.1. This is 10% boost, right? So every level that you have another 10% boost. So this is level 2. Red bull gives you more. And here 0.1 again, and then just gonna keep duplicating this. Level 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. Wings only has 5 levels, right, actually, so we can remove the rest. So this is wings. And then we also want to do it for something else like Camarola or for like the other stuff. So let's go back to passive items. So we have one for wings. Let's create another passive data for Camarola. That's the regeneration, right? So you can also duplicate the wings, but if you want to duplicate it, I have to go to show in Explorer. Then I have to duplicate the wings asset like that. Then I don't have to recreate all the stats in Camarola. So let me just delete this. And then I duplicated the wings, and then let's just call it Camarola. And then now I can update Camarola. Camarola will be a different icon, right? Okay, so maybe it's just a heart. So I'll just find something red. Again, it's 5 levels, not 8. Okay, so this will be Camarola. So you get the idea, right? So gives region. Okay, so Camarola will be recovery of 0.2, right? And then level 2 is the same thing. Gives more region. Yeah, this will be 0.2. And then again, I'm just gonna duplicate the array elements accordingly. Right, so level 2, and then just duplicate this, level 3, level 4, level 5. So level 3, level 4, and then level 5. Okay, so these are all the passives. Okay, so we have 2 passives and then we have 1 weapon, right? So maybe let's just create one more passive. Again, I'm just gonna right click, show in Explorer, so that I can copy and paste the wings asset again, and then I'll just name this, what should we, spinach. Okay, and then for the spinach, let's call it spinach. Makes you like just a random bunch of words. Let's find something green for it. And it looks like a spinach. And then spinach will be increases your might by 10%, right? So might will be 0.1. Then this gives more muscle. And then might is 0.1. And again, I will delete all the old entries. And then just to fastest way to do it, right? Just to duplicate level 2 and just level, because it's all 10%, 10%, 10%, right? So by doing this, we now have a bunch of passives, and then we can assign the passives to the play inventory script. Once we do that, we can test the knife. So let's just save. And then for the knife, I'm just gonna make sure that it's set up properly, right? So knife over here, let's assign a sprite to it. So this is the sprite for knife. Then we have some level data, right? Only up to 5, but it's fine. Okay, and then for the prefab of the knife, I forgot to make the collider a trigger. So this is the sprite for knife. Then we have some level data, right? Only up to 5, but it's fine. Okay, and then for the prefab of the knife, I forgot to make the collider a trigger. So the speed of the knife, it shouldn't be 1. Let's try 10. So let's try this again and let's play, and then we should get the knife shooting out. Okay. So with the player character as well, I think I didn't set the character data properly. Okay, so let's call this Gennaro. This is our knife character, right? And then let's find this character and just drop him inside the player, the character scriptable object folder. Again, I'm gonna obsolete the old characters. So it's not speed, this is supposed speed, right? So now the character works properly. Okay, so the last thing we will have to do here is to get the weapon evolution system to work. And what does that entail? Okay, let me just copy and paste all of this stuff and then I'll explain this to you in Unity itself. Once we do that, okay, what you will find is that it adds this evolution data tab. And then if you add an evolution data, you will see a whole bunch of stuff that you can modify. What are these things that you can modify? Okay, these things are basically, it controls what options you have when it comes to evolving your weapon. Okay, so for example, this is one of the weapon evolutions that I've created in a past stream for the garlic. So as you know, the garlic evolves into the soul eater. If you want to have a look at that, you can just click on this to refer to that. Okay, so the soul eater is a evolution, so that's why the name here is soul eater. This is how it evolves. Okay, so the condition over here, there are two options, auto and treasure chest. Okay, so if you select auto, once the conditions are met, the weapon will evolve by itself. But if you select treasure chest, only if you find a treasure chest can you get the evolved weapon. And then there is also a consumes here, which basically has a couple of options that you can choose from. Okay, so consumes is basically when the weapon evolves, does it consume both the weapon and the passive, or does it only consume the weapon, or does it only consume the passive? Okay, so in Vampire Survivors by default, only the weapons are consumed. So you can also set the evolution level. So for example, for the garlic, okay, you will find that if the garlic is level 8, this is when it evolves. And for the catalyst, these are all the different items other items that you need. Okay, so for example, for the garlic, you will need the garlic to have a pump roller as well. Okay, and then the level needs to be 5. And then what is the outcome? The outcome again is a weapon data. This is the resulting item. So you can assign either a passive or a weapon. This system is super flexible because if you see here, the evolution always takes items. Okay, over here it takes items and it takes items. So you can, for example, assign your weapons to evolve from 2 items and then it evolves into a passive. This is possible as well. Again, because item data means you can assign either a weapon here or you can assign a passive here. So it's possible for you to create 2 weapons that evolve to a passive, for example. Okay, so this is a simple interface that we can use to define evolution, and it's also much more flexible than the old system, right? Okay, just by virtue of how many things are in there, right? So in the article there's a table that explains all of this. Okay, so you can have a read. This is just, I've talked about all of this already. So the item class, okay, what does the item class do? Okay, the changes to the item class are as follows. The item class basically has a couple of changes. Okay, it has 2 new functions added. Okay, actually 3 new functions added. Okay, so it has a can evolve function that's added. This checks whether the item is able to evolve at this time. Okay, how does it check it? It checks it by looking through the evolution data and seeing whether it has all the catalysts and whether the catalysts are all in the required level. Okay, so this can evolve checks for that. Okay, so there are 2 can evolve functions. One of it checks if a specific item is able to evolve. This one just checks your whole inventory. Okay, so there are 2 functions over here, and if you notice for the can evolve that doesn't take any arguments, it actually goes through all the items and it individually calls the can evolve with the item inside. Okay, so you have 2 evolution checking functions, and then after that you also have a function that evolves the weapon. And what it does here is that it looks through and then it checks whether we should consume the passive or consume the weapon. If it does, then you will cycle through the inventory and then remove the respective passive or the respective weapons that are supposed to be consumed. Okay, after we consume that, we determine whether the item should consume itself. Okay, this depends on whether, of course, if you are from a passive, does the evolution consume the passive? If it does, it removes the passive or the weapon. Okay, and finally, you add the evolved weapon to the inventory. Okay, so the comments are here to help you understand the code. Okay, and finally, in the do level up function, we just add a little snippet here to get every item in the inventory to try and evolve. Okay, so when you try and evolve, doesn't mean that you evolve. When you call attempt evolution, if the item cannot evolve, then it will just return false. Okay, so we are just whenever we level up, we want to check through every item in the inventory to see whether they can evolve. This is only if the condition of evolution here is set to auto, which means that over here, this condition here is set to auto. Okay, so after we are done with this, you will have a new bunch of evolution data array to play with. It's just one array. You have one new array to play with to determine the evolution data. Okay, one thing that you need to pay attention to, right, is that for the weapon evolution to work properly, you will need to define the weapon from both sides, which means that let's say if knife plus spinach evolves into Pomerola, right? You define this in the knife, you also have to define this in the spinach. So in the spinach, you will define this in the opposite direction. Alright, so the spinach here, it will be, say, level 2, and then evolution data is 1, right? Then this will be, say, same thing, knife plus spinach. But now this will be 2, and then after that, you will put in the knife here. Right, the knife will go here. The knife has to be level 8. Then it evolves into wings, which is level 1. Okay, so you have to define this in both directions, otherwise the evolution does not always work. Okay, just one thing to take note of. Okay, so next section we have is we need to modify the treasure chest as well. What you want to do is in the treasure chest, right, we are just removing the parts using the inventory manager. Then we are just adding the play inventory. Okay, so we are doing things a little different over here. So because the open treasure chest no longer requires us to use the inventory to check for possible evolutions, the items are the ones that they are doing it now. So we can remove all the functions that use the inventory to check for evolutions. And then here what we are doing is we're just looping through every slot in the play inventory. And then we are trying to get the item to evolve. Again, just because you get the item to attempt evolution doesn't mean that it will actually evolve. Whether it actually evolves depends on whether the conditions for the evolution are met. Okay, so we are just updating the treasure chest because the purpose of the treasure chest for us was the treasure chest never gave us items. Okay, eventually we will update the treasure chest to do so, but right now the treasure chest only gets us to evolve. Okay, which is why I'm updating the code, the evolution code for the treasure chest right. So what we have here is we have code for the garlic weapon. We will go through the code for the garlic weapon in the next part. Alright, because this part is really long enough, right? A lot of stuff in this part already. So we're just gonna give you this code first, so you can just copy the code. So for our garlic, right? Okay, the garlic uses an aura script. Okay, in the old garlic weapon that we had, the garlic worked a little differently. Okay, the garlic activated once every 1 or 2 seconds, and only on the frame that it activates will it damage. But this is not how the garlic works in Vampire Survivors. Okay, in Vampire Survivors, whenever the garlic first touches an enemy, it will deal damage. After it deals damage, it will track every enemy. It will track when is the last time damage was dealt, and then after the cooldown is finished, it will deal damage to every enemy in the area again. So this is a bit different from how we put out a garlic weapon, which only works for a single frame, as opposed to the garlic in the game that works for every frame. Okay, so we have to recode the garlic system, and it uses an aura. Okay, what an aura is basically it's an area where you're constantly dealing damage. Okay, and you're constantly dealing damage only after the cooldown is reached. Okay, this is a little complex to explain, I guess. Perhaps in the next part we will drop an image to show this to you to illustrate this a little bit clearer. Okay, I hope I'm making sense right now. Okay, so this code for the aura, because this aura doesn't only apply to the garlic, so it can also be used later on for the center water and a bunch of other weapons. Okay, this is why we are coding a generic script called an aura that we will be able to reuse for our other weapons. Okay, we will go through the code in part 60. Okay, and then for us to set up the garlic, okay, what we need to do is just copy the aura weapon as well. When I add the aura weapon script, I'll get an error. Okay, the error is because inside the... Okay, if we go all the way back to the weapon stats object, right? We commented out this aura prefect. Okay, this is because every weapon that we have can have an aura assigned as well as a projectile assigned. Okay, so if we just uncomment this part over here, the error will be fixed. And we will also get a new aura weapon for all weapon dropdowns. Okay, if we go over to weapons over here, this knife here, remember this behavior dropdown. Okay, I can make it either a projectile or an aura weapon. Okay, so for the garlic, so you guys can try yourself actually. Just select aura weapon here, and then we will have to create an aura prefect. I'm gonna set up the garlic weapon inside editing. Okay, one thing I forgot. Okay, sorry. You have to set the UI upgrade options as well, or the options will not appear. Okay, so you have to go to canvas again, and then you can just copy the values from here. I'm just gonna copy the values from here, from the inventory manager, the old inventory manager component, and then paste it over here. Okay, so these are all just components for the upgrade window that you see right here. The last thing is, so once you're done, we will, over here we just have a list in the article. We have a list of all the scripts that we have marked as obsolete. Okay, so I marked some scripts as obsolete across this part, so it shouldn't be difficult for you to do that. So in the Patreon project files, we have the same thing. So we also have all these scripts and they're all marked as obsolete. So you can refer to the Patreon project files. I recommend you mark the scripts as obsolete because we are not going to be using them anymore for this project. So why do we not remove the obsolete files right away? Because in certain cases, if we just delete the file, right, because other scripts refer to these obsolete files. So by deleting an old script, it may break our project. So like I say here, in a future part, we may look into removing these files. And we've come to the end of this part, quite late over here. It's time for me to retire. As usual, if you're a silver tier Patreon, you will be able to download project files, and thank you for your support. I hope that this part hasn't been too confusing for you guys. So let me know in the comments below or in the blog. So, and yeah, I think so that's it. I'll see you guys next time. Happy New Year guys again, all the best. I'll see you guys around.